I moved into my flat in March. Ground floor, 1 bedroom, quiet street. I had viewed it twice before signing, and both times it felt right. That specific feeling of a space that could become home. I signed the lease, got the keys, and moved in on a Saturday. The landlord was a private individual. He had owned the property for 12 years. Before me, there had been 2 long-term tenants, a couple who had lived there for 7 years, and before them, a single man for 4. The landlord was friendly and responsive. I had no reason to think about anything except settling in. The first thing I noticed was the mug. I have a specific habit with mugs. I always put them handle right when I wash them up. Right side facing out, left side against the back of the cupboard. I have done this my whole adult life without thinking about it. One morning, about 3 weeks after moving in, I opened the cupboard, and the mug closest to the front had its handle facing left. I stared at it for a moment. Then I told myself I had been tired when I washed up the previous night. I put the handle right and made my coffee and forgot about it. A week later, the chair at my kitchen table. I always push it in when I leave the kitchen. Always. I came home from work to find it pulled out, angled slightly away from the table as if someone had been sitting in it, and stood up without pushing it back. I stood in my kitchen doorway and looked at that chair for a long time. And then I told myself I had left it out that morning and not noticed. I pushed it in and went to make dinner. But something had changed inside me. Some low-frequency alarm had started going off that I could not locate or silence. Over the next 3 weeks, I started paying attention. Really paying attention. The way you do when something in your body is telling you that your mind has been lying to you. I started photographing my flat before I left every morning. Not elaborately, just a quick sweep on my phone. The kitchen, the living room, my bedroom, the hallway. 30 seconds. Every morning before I left for work. On the 14th morning of doing this, I came home and compared the photos to the flat as it stood. The kitchen chair was out again. Not dramatically, just slightly. An inch or 2 pulled away from the table. In the photos, it was pushed in. I had not sat at that table that morning. I had eaten standing at the counter the way I always do when I am running late. I sat down on my kitchen floor and stayed there for a while. Someone had been in my flat while I was at work. They had sat at my kitchen table. They had pushed the chair back in before they left, almost all the way. But not quite. Not quite the way I would have pushed it. Not quite the same angle. I called the police. While I was waiting for them, I walked slowly through every room in my flat, looking for anything else. Anything I had missed. In the kitchen, under the table, in the corner where the shadow was deepest. I found a boot print. A single partial boot print on the linoleum. Slightly muddy, dried. From someone who had stood in the corner of my kitchen, standing still, not moving, just standing there. The police were thorough. They checked every point of entry, every window, every door. Nothing forced, nothing tampered with. The deadbolt on the front door was intact and fully functional. The back door the same, the windows all locked from the inside. There was no way in, and yet someone had been in. One of the officers asked me a question that I had not thought to consider. He asked if I knew how many keys existed for the property. I said 2, mine and the landlord's. He asked if I knew whether the locks had been changed when I moved in. I did not know. I had never asked. It had not occurred to me to ask. I called my landlord from the kitchen while the officers were still there. I asked him directly, when the previous tenants left. "Did you change the locks?" There was a pause. Then he said, "No, the locks are original. I have had no reason to change them. The couple who had lived in my flat for 7 years before me had never returned their keys. The landlord had assumed they had kept them by mistake and had not pursued it. 7 years is a long time. People move on. The police traced the previous tenants. The couple had divorced. The woman had moved abroad. The man was living locally, 10 minutes from my flat. He was spoken to. He denied everything. There was no direct evidence linking him to the boot print. He could not be charged. I had the locks changed the same day. 4 new deadbolts. A chain on the inside of the front door that could not be opened from outside, regardless of what key someone had. I never saw him. I never spoke to him. I do not know how many times he came in. I do not know what he did in there. I do not know if he was in the flat the night before I found the boot print. I do not know if he was ever there while I was home. That last part is the one I cannot let go of. Whether he was ever there while I was sleeping in the next room, whether he ever stood in that kitchen corner and listened to me breathe. I moved out 6 months later. I could not stay. Change your locks when you move into a new property. Today, not when you get around to it. Today. I had the alarm system installed 18 months ago. Professional installation, monitored system, the works. I live alone. I work long hours. I wanted to feel secure, and the alarm gave me that. Every morning, I set it when I left. Every evening, I disarmed it when I came home. Simple routine. 6-digit code that only I knew. I had never written it down anywhere, never told anyone. The first time it happened, I assumed I had made a mistake. I came home on a Wednesday evening, and the alarm panel showed disarmed. I was certain I had set it that morning. I could remember doing it, the specific muscle memory of pressing the buttons. But the panel showed it had been disarmed at 11:47 a.m. I had been at work at 11:47 a.m. I had not come home. I had not touched the alarm. I called the alarm company. They checked the system remotely and found no fault. They said it was possible the system had experienced a brief power fluctuation that had reset the armed status. It was rare, but it happened. They sent an engineer the following week who checked every component and found nothing wrong. I reset to a new 6-digit code that I chose randomly and told no one. 2 weeks later, disarmed again. 10:23 a.m., a Thursday. I was in a meeting on the other side of the city. I called the alarm company again. They were apologetic and thorough. Another engineer, another full inspection. Everything functioning perfectly. No technical explanation for the disarming. I changed the code again. A third code. Longer this time, 8 digits. Random numbers I selected standing in my kitchen with my eyes closed, pressing buttons without pattern. The third disarming happened 5 days after I changed to the 8-digit code. 9:58 a.m. on a Monday. I was in the car on the way to a client meeting. My phone showed the notification, alarm disarmed. And I had to pull over because my hands were shaking too badly to drive. 3 different codes, 3 disarmings, all during working hours, all on weekdays, all at times when my car would not be in the driveway. I drove home instead of to the meeting. I told my client I had a family emergency. I parked around the corner from my house and walked. I let myself in quietly through the front door and stood in the hallway and listened. The house was empty. Nothing moved. Nothing out of place that I could identify. I walked through every room slowly. Kitchen, living room, bathroom, bedroom, spare room. In the spare room, which I used as a home office and almost never opened the window in, the window was slightly open. Not wide, just slightly. A gap of maybe 2 centimeters at the bottom of the sash. Enough to feel a draft if you stood directly next to it. I stood there looking at that window for a long time. The spare room window faced the side return of my house, the narrow gap between my property and the neighbor's fence. Not visible from the street, not visible from my neighbor's windows. Completely private and completely unobserved. Someone had found the one window in my house that no one would ever see them using. I called the police. They came and they were thorough, and they found the same thing the alarm company had found. No evidence of forced entry anywhere. The window latch was intact. It had been opened from inside, which meant either it had been left unlocked at some point and someone had entered previously to unlock it, or someone had found a way to manipulate the latch from outside. The alarm question took longer to answer. A specialist the police brought in examined the alarm panel. He found something the alarm company's engineers had missed or had not looked for. A small device had been attached to the back of the panel housing, inside the wall, not visible without removing the panel cover. A signal interceptor, a device designed to capture and replay the disarm code transmitted when I entered it each evening. Someone had broken into my home previously, before I noticed anything wrong, had planted the interceptor on the alarm panel, and had then been using the captured code to disarm the system at will, before I had ever suspected anything. Before the first disarming, I noticed. Someone had already been inside, had spent enough time in my home to locate the alarm panel, open the housing, attach a device, close it up, and leave without a trace. The police never identified who it was. The interceptor device was commercially available. No fingerprints, no DNA. No security camera in my street had footage of anyone entering or leaving my property. I moved out within a month. New city, new flat. Before I moved in, I hired a security specialist to sweep the entire property, every socket, every panel, every fitting. He found nothing. But I still check. Every few months, I check again. Because I know now that finding nothing does not mean nothing is there. It might just mean they are better at hiding it than you are at looking. I bought a smart home system 2 years ago. Motion sensors in every room, camera at the front door, app on my phone that notified me whenever something triggered. I was proud of it, if I am honest. Proud of the technology, proud of feeling safe and informed about my own space. I want to be precise about when it started because the timing matters. The first notification came on a Tuesday night in October, 3:04 a.m. Motion detected, kitchen. I was asleep. My phone lit up on the bedside table. I picked it up, checked the app, opened the live feed for the kitchen camera. Empty. Completely empty. The kitchen was exactly as I had left it before bed. I put the phone down and went back to sleep. Faulty sensor. It happens. Wednesday night, 3:06 a.m. Motion detected, kitchen. I checked the feed. Empty. Thursday, 3:02 a.m. Same notification, same empty kitchen on the feed. I called the smart home company on Friday morning. They ran a remote diagnostic. No fault found. They suggested the sensor might be picking up a temperature fluctuation, the boiler cycling on, a draft from a gap in the window seal. They offered to send a technician. I said yes. The technician came, checked the sensor, repositioned it slightly, told me it should be fine now. Friday night, 3:01 a.m. Motion detected, kitchen. After 2 weeks of nightly notifications, I stopped checking the live feed. I had checked it 14 times. 14 times the kitchen had been empty. I started dismissing the notifications without looking. Faulty sensor. Technology being technology, I had a technician booked for a second visit. But something was bothering me that I could not articulate. Something about the timing. Every notification had come between 3 a.m. and 3:10 a.m., not 2 a.m., not 4 a.m., not varying times. The same 10-minute window, every single night. A temperature fluctuation from the boiler does not happen at the same 10-minute window every night. A draft from a window gap does not have that precision. I had enough technical understanding to know that what I was experiencing was not what the company was suggesting it was. I started staying up. Not all night, just until 3:15 a.m., sitting in my living room in the dark, watching. On the fourth night of doing this, the notification came at 3:03 a.m., and I walked to the kitchen doorway immediately. The kitchen was empty, but the sensor light, the small red indicator that blinks when the sensor is actively detecting movement, was on. Steady, not blinking, solid red. A blinking red light means stand by. A solid red light means active detection. Something in my kitchen was actively triggering that sensor. Something that was not showing up on the camera feed. Something the camera could not see. I stood in the doorway of my kitchen at 3 a.m., looking at a solid red sensor light in an empty room, and felt something I had not felt since I was a child. Pure, unrationalizable fear. I called the smart home company again the next morning. I described exactly what I had seen. The solid red light, the empty room, the precise timing. The tone of the conversation changed. The person I spoke to went quiet for a moment and then asked me to hold. When they came back, they asked me if anyone else had access to my smart home account. I said no. They asked if I had ever shared my login credentials. I said no. They told me they were going to run a full account audit and call me back within the hour. They called back in 40 minutes. Someone had accessed my smart home account 17 days earlier, the day before the first notification. They had accessed it remotely using my login credentials. They had not changed anything visible in the app, but they had made one change in the system settings that was not immediately obvious. They had adjusted the kitchen motion sensor sensitivity settings. Specifically, they had reduced the detection radius of the sensor so that it covered only the far half of the kitchen, the half furthest from the door, and they had enabled a secondary detection mode that the sensor supported, but that almost no users knew about. A mode that detected motion, but did not trigger the camera recording. Motion notification only. No footage. Someone had configured my kitchen sensor to detect motion in the far corner of my kitchen without recording any footage of what it was detecting. I sat with that information for a very long time. Someone had access to my account. Someone had configured my sensor to detect something in the corner of my kitchen every night at 3 a.m. without leaving any visual record of what that something was. The police were called. The smart home company cooperated fully. The account access had come through a compromised password. I had used the same password for the smart home app as for an email account that had been part of a data breach 18 months earlier. The IP address of the login traced to a public Wi-Fi network. Untraceable. The sensor settings were restored. The notification stopped. I moved out 2 weeks later. But before I left, on my last night in that flat, I stood in the kitchen doorway one more time, at 3 a.m. with the lights off, looking at the far corner of the kitchen. and I thought about what the sensor had been detecting every night for 3 weeks. In that corner, at that time, with a camera deliberately configured not to record it. I thought about whether it was a person, whether someone had found a way in that nobody ever discovered, whether they had been standing in that corner every night, waiting for something, patient and still in the dark, or whether it was something else entirely, something that a camera might not have been able to capture even if it had been recording. I do not know which possibility disturbs me more, and I have thought about it every single night since. I want to ask you 3 things before you close this video. When did you last change your locks? Not when you first moved in. When did you last actually change them? When did you last check your alarm panel, the housing itself, not just the display? And when did you last check your smart home account for logins you did not make? Leave your answers in the comments. I read every single one. And if any part of these stories reminded you of something that happened in your own home, something you dismissed, something you told yourself was nothing, I really want to hear about it. My email is in the description. Send me your story. It might be the next one I read on this channel. If you are not subscribed to Mr. SHM, please subscribe right now. True horror stories every single week. Stories that actually happen to real people. Change your locks, check your alarm panel, and check your smart home account tonight. I will see you in the next one.